Welcome back to the Dynasty Football Key. Hey, I've got a very special guest, the OG fantasy Theo Gremminger, who I've been working with from the player profiler side. And I mean, we've got the Podfather, but Theo, I don't know, he might be the Pod King. I'm not sure, man, because this guy is pumping out content every day. Really love watching how this guy is operating behind the scenes and doing it for the people. So appreciate all the content you've been putting out there and the opportunity that you guys have given me to work with you guys over Player Profiler. But thanks for joining the show today, Theo. How's it going?
No, it's my pleasure, Alex. I'm stoked to be here. I appreciate the kind words, and and a big shout out to Alex, who's also been really grinding and helping us a lot this offseason at Player Profiler. So it's been a fun summer. I think we put out a lot of really good stuff. Just had Scott Barrett on press coverage, dropping a couple of episodes of Dynasty Life over the next couple days as well. So it's been really fun. It feels like there's been no break since NFL draft season. It's just been straight this year. Usually after the NFL draft, there's like a little bit of a cooling down before rookie draft season. This year, it feels like it amped up, but we're nearing the finish line. In season is right around the corner. I got a bunch of drafts coming up, like yourself, I'm sure, and everything's almost here.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We had some actual football last night with the Hall of Fame game, and even though they cut it short due to rain, still was just good to see some football being played. And we'll actually be in Canton, Ohio next week at the Fantasy Football Expo. So if anyone's out there, hey, check us out. Come by. I've got a booth. A lot of other good content creators out there. I had Dynasty Daddy on the show not too long ago. He's actually two booths to my left. So really cool group that we're gonna have there. And for this season, I feel like a lot of people when we talk best ball and things like that, they're really focused on some of those week 17 stacks and matchups, right? But for lineup leagues, you got to win week one. You need to win that first month. You don't want to be climbing out of that 0 and 2, 0 and 3, 0 and 4 hole and hoping that you get lucky down the stretch. So it's one of those things where right now during preseason and the training camp, we want to make sure we're not drafting those injuries because the injuries are going to find you. So let's make sure that we look at some of these matchups, feel pretty good about who we are starting in these early weeks, not just for Dynasty at this point, but also redraft. A lot of folks are wondering who should they be taking. But, again, I wanted to quickly say, the only takeaway I've got from the Hall of Fame game is that football is back. And I would say a lot of this content that's been out there, like the receiver show and Hard Knocks, I eat that stuff up. I love it. But Theo, since you're on the show, the Giants Hard Knocks in that final episode, they featured Theo Johnson, and I'm curious. This is still more of a dynasty cut, but may have some relevance this season. How are you feeling about maybe a lesser known player in Theo Johnson?
Well, first of all, he's got the greatest first name in the NFL, so we got to get that out of the way, and that kind of bumps him up a notch. But in all seriousness, you're talking about a next level athlete, one of the most athletic tight ends that came through the NFL Combine. Penn State people, he didn't really have anybody at Penn State like this guy's going to be the next one, but he did catch a fair number of touchdowns in that offense last year, and that wasn't an offense that was exactly like lighting the world on fire by any means. So Johnson's a player where he had a strong Senior Bowl. By all accounts, like nobody was knocking him down any notches in the Senior Bowl. But then it was really the NFL Combine where he made a massive mark. This was one of the most athletic tight end profiles we've ever seen, and different than a lot of the tight ends we've seen recently because of his size. So he has size and speed. And for a player like that, you have to anticipate that he's going to be a guy who can block, which is nothing we get fantasy points for, but it keeps him on the field. It maybe puts him ahead of a Bellinger. So tight ends with athleticism, we should always pay attention to. It's one position where you cannot succeed in fantasy football if you don't have athleticism. Like occasionally we get a slower running back who's like an outlier. Occasionally we get a wide, I mean, we get them all the time. Some of these 4-6 wide receivers where we think they're a little step slow and they have great careers. Cooper Kupp's a 4-6 guy. Keenan Allen was like a 4-7 guy. But tight end is an athletic player's spot. So for me, the cost for him was never prohibitive in rookie drafts. So I have a fair amount of exposure there. And we'll see. I think like if it's not somebody we want to steam up if you have late rookie drafts, but it's somebody where if he falls to you in a decent range, I'm totally fine taking shots on Theo Johnson.
Awesome. Well, I really I want to see if he can do something, man. Yeah, on our Phenom score, he's one of the most athletic tight ends we've seen. So really excited to see what he can do. And yeah, I would say we can go ahead and jump into the schedule for week 1 here. We've got Baltimore Ravens going to Kansas City. And, you know, this is, that playoff matchup that we saw. And Lamar, even though he's a back to back MVP, hasn't been able to get over the hump versus the Chiefs. But from a fantasy perspective, I'm still all in on Lamar Jackson, obviously, but I'm curious a specific player, a couple players I'm wondering about Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. And then for me, I actually am wondering who is legitimately the third option because I just did a show doing the depth chart breakdown, and I'm kind of starting to feel like from the receiver perspective, it's not a wide receiver. It actually might be Isaiah Likely. Um, I think they're going to run it a lot, feed Derrick Henry, and have that 1-2 punch where I was listening to Jason Allwine's show this morning, and his guest had referenced it being like a thunder and lightning, but Lamar Jackson's the lightning, which you really don't see out of a backfield. But what excites you about this? Either the Baltimore guys, who might be that third option, and even this matchup in general, we can lead over into Chiefs.
Oh man. So the matchup itself, I mean, how could you not be as excited as possible from a pure NFL fan, let alone a fantasy football fan? The opening game has been sort of a mixed bag for us. I know I'm always out in Vegas where we draft NFFC and FFPC drafts, and there's a big watch party. And I remember a couple years back where we had like Tampa Bay in opening game, and it was like this incredible shootout. Then we've had other times where it's been real clunkers where it's a terrible way to start out the fantasy season when you have sort of a game where the score goes under and you're just kind of hoping for points at the end. Like last year, Detroit, Kansas City was not a great game at all for us as fantasy managers. The year before was Buffalo and the Rams. That one we had, I think it was a positive because you had like a big Cooper Cup game. You had it was like a weird one though. Like it wasn't like fireworks. I hope this is fireworks. It could go the other way because both of these teams have strong defenses, especially Baltimore. But the fact that it's in Kansas City, I think lends itself a little bit more to an over environment. Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, how could you not love that? But from the Baltimore Ravens perspective, I'm more bullish on Zay Flowers than some. I've talked about this on a number of my pods. This is a player that I think profiles to become a very high target earner at some point in his career. And I think at some point in his career, he's going to have a season where he challenges Derek Mason for the all-time Ravens receptions record. Last year, we saw some very positive signs out of him. He's very, very strong with the ball in his hands. He's able to accumulate yards off a yak. He has good separation with his route running. So for me, when you look at a profile like that and you're an offensive coordinator, that's a guy that you want to scheme for, especially considering Todd Monken's a smart guy. He had them in a top 5 scoring offense last year in year 1 in Baltimore. Zay Flowers was their first round pick, the first round pick in his tenure as offensive coordinator in Baltimore. I think a lot of the people who are fading Zay Flowers are not projecting any sort of an increase. They think it's sort of he's going to take a big backseat to Mark Andrews. I'm not so sure about that. I think Zay is a very solid value, and you sort of lent it a nice lead into this one because you talked about how we have question marks about the other wide receivers. The early hype on Rashad Bateman, I truly believe that Bateman is a Harbaugh guy. I think Harbaugh likes him personally. I think Harbaugh's rooted for his success in the NFL, and they re-signed him this year. They basically restructured the deal to keep him in Baltimore. So internally, the organization, I think, really likes Bateman, but I think we've seen it enough. I like the guy's had some games here. He's never been a very commanding guy in terms of targets. He's had some games where some of his best fantasy performances were like 1 or 2 big plays, but people love it because of the draft capital. I certainly was on Rashad Bateman as a rookie, but for me, it's Zay Flowers is so much better than the next wide receivers there. And I completely agree with you that you're going to see more Isaiah Likely. I think they're going to be in 12 personnel this year. That's what we saw out of Todd Monken when he was at Georgia, when they have basically been a factory of churning out tight ends to the NFL, with Brock Bowers being the chosen one and the highest drafted one. But I think it's all kind of going to be a very consolidated offense. Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, both can return value at ADP. Isaiah Likely is a player where in best ball, prioritize him. You don't have to worry about the weeks. And if you're in Dynasty, he is almost a must roster player if you have Mark Andrews. And it's a weird thing to say, but it's been proven time and time again that when Mark Andrews is out, Isaiah Likely is a tight end one. Their numbers were similar last year, and Lamar Jackson seems quite comfortable with Likely. So I'm with you on that. I think Isaiah Likely a little bit of you get like an offseason window to trade for him every year. And then when Mark Andrews misses time, he's cost so much more. So I'm with you on that. And I think it's also interesting you bring up the run Derrick Henry a lot. And it's sort of it's to me, this is one of the offseason storylines for usage for any offense is Lamar Jackson has led Baltimore in rushing yards ever since he took over as the starter, every single year. We also haven't seen a running back have more than 198 attempts in any single season with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's basically the vulture of all vultures because he can take touchdowns around the goal line, and he also rips off the long runs to take away those opportunities inside the 20s. So it's going to be, if I'm an opposing defense, I feel like there's a ton of pressure on me with Derrick Henry now next to Lamar Jackson. But from a fantasy football perspective, does Henry hurt Lamar Jackson, or is this a situation where maybe Derrick Henry, we need to pump the brakes a bit? It could happen where they both really, really hit, but it's sort of like it's a philosophical change almost, where you got a running back who's led the NFL in carries in 4 out of 5 seasons. And the only reason he didn't lead it in 5 out of 5 seasons is because he got hurt that one year. I think that was 2021. And now you have Derrick Henry, the guy who every offensive coordinator is giving the rock to time and time again, next to the quarterback who's the best rushing quarterback in NFL history. So scary for defenses, but also a little bit question marks for us as fantasy managers.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think overall, maybe it's a consolidated target share from the receiving aspect. I think that's maybe the easiest way to say it. But then for Derrick Henry, without him ever having that pass catching profile, I don't see much of a change there. I do think the vultureness of Lamar is there, but I was saying something last night about how Saquon Barkley going to the Eagles helps the Eagles because Jason Kelsey retired, and their offensive line has been a little bit weaker. And from all reports I'm hearing, the offensive line subtractions versus additions for the Ravens, they were kind of in a similar scenario where the offensive line isn't one of the top in the NFL. So maybe they're trying to make up for that delta with Derrick Henry. So we'll see if he can pick up the slack there for them. Awesome. Okay, so that's Thursday. We're kicking it off, and I love how they've got a back-to-back game. They're going Friday, another headliner. It's going to be Green Bay Packers versus the Philadelphia Eagles. And I don't know I can't remember if they did a Friday night standalone game last year, week 1.
Never,
ever. Okay, so
yeah. I believe that the Black Friday game that they had the day after Thanksgiving, where it was, I think, Miami versus the Jets. I want to say that was the first time that we've had I'm not 100% on that, but I know that was like very odd to have a Friday game then. So this is awesome to me. I mean, it's also primetime on Friday night, and I think this is the game that goes off. This is the game where we have offensive explosion. We have fireworks. I could see like the Kansas City Baltimore game being slightly disappointing to us, like a 23-20 type game where both teams are like kind of not really trying to open themselves up, comes right down to the wire. I think Green Bay, Philly on the flip side could be like the 38-35 game that we really, really want. It's two teams with very strong quarterbacks, very strong offenses, and it's just like, how could Brazil not be an over environment? You think people are showing up to Sao Paulo, Brazil to watch some 17-14 game? This is like, it's going to be hot. It's going to be a really, really fun crowd. They are very enthusiastic about football down in Brazil. I think like having an NFL game there, it's going to be an awesome environment for it.
Yeah, I love it. I forgot about that until you mentioned it. That's incredible.
It's
So it's going to
awesome.
be really really fun. And guys, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/Dynasty Football Key. I've got full PPR projections, and I've got Jalen Hurts number 2, and Jordan Love. We'll see how he ends up ranking out this season, but I'm pretty excited about what these guys can do. I've got my rankings on here as well from Dynasty perspective. I got them at 12. Pretty much behind the rushing quarterbacks, but I'm excited for this because he's got a lot of weapons too. Uh, both guys, right? So if we go ahead and take a look at the Green Bay Packers, right? You've got Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Romeo Dubs, Wicks. I mean, Wicks had a 20-point game at the end of the season. Dobbs has been a consistent target. Reed is really good, and Watson has been working on his body to be, more healthy and durable throughout the season. We like the tight end there. They added the running back. This is a loaded offense, and if we flip over to the Eagles, I mean, Jalen Hurts from the rushing perspective, and Barkley, like we mentioned, getting added there with AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, who I've learned don't fade Devonta Smith.
No,
He's great, wire 3 for your team, and so a lot of offense is going to be going off here. So I'm excited for this matchup too, and yeah, really good way, a couple games to start the season, and people be marinating on that Saturday and excited for these Sunday matchups. So I don't. I think the big question is, can like a Jalen Hurts continue doing the tush push, or like I had mentioned with the Baltimore situation, I do think it's Barkley is there to pick up the slack. So Barkley does have some pass catching upside, and it's just again how you mentioned Derrick Henry operated a certain way. Barkley was always the number one target on his team, number one person, player on his team for the most part. So it'll be a little bit of change since they do have a AJ Brown and other options to get the ball to. But I still think he is going to well make up for it and getting more total touchdowns than he's ever gotten, and still potentially similar number of catches, and definitely more yards since they'll have more first downs and less 3 and outs. Other than what we've already spoken on, any other things stand out to you about this game?
no, I mean, I think that the Hurts one is interesting. He has more rushing touchdowns over a 3-year period than any quarterback in NFL history. So I don't think it's going away. I think like Kellen Moore, Kellen Moore being there as the offensive coordinator, I think we'll see Jalen Hurts have more pass attempts than he ever has. And I think that's actually going to be helpful for his ceiling because
Okay.
we know the rushing scores are going to be there. Saquon's the interesting one, though. Like we haven't seen a running back get more than 50 targets in any season. Hurts has been the quarterback there. It's a short sample size, but DeAndre Swift was a guy who always commanded targets. And I thought DeAndre Swift would have had more targets last offseason. DeAndre Swift ends up getting 1,000 rushing yards. If you would have told me that DeAndre Swift would have had 1,000 rushing yards in this time last summer, then I would have said, wow, we need to draft DeAndre Swift in every single draft because he's also going to add the receptions. Just wasn't a thing. He had 39 of them. So Barkley, it'll be interesting. And I think we'll know early on. I think we'll know over the first 4 games if this is going to be part of it. But there's been a lot of speculation and talk from the media there, the beat reporters, that they want to get Saquon involved as a receiver. He's obviously very good at it. And I think that they think that this will add a little bit further element to them, protects Jalen Hurts a little more. And last year, they were just so predictable as an offense, especially in the second half of the year. And you saw it in the playoffs, just get absolutely demolished by Tampa Bay. So I think Saquon in there, it's going to be consolidated, though. Like you bring up Devonta, you bring up AJ. Those guys aren't going anywhere. Highly targeted players, especially AJ, back-to-back 1,400-yard seasons. But Saquon Barkley, we'll see. If Saquon can be what he has been as a receiver, nothing crazy, but we're talking about give me 55 catches out of Saquon this year. I think he'll really return value on his ADP because I completely agree with you. He's going to feast on touchdowns and also playing behind the best offensive line he's ever played in compared to the offensive line mess in New York, and playing next to, I realize Daniel Jones had a season where he had 700 rushing yards, but when it comes down to it, it's apples and oranges. Jalen Hurts is a true threat, the best quarterback, the most talented quarterback that Saquon's ever played alongside in his entire career.
Absolutely, and he's gonna have 2 revenge games against the Giants, so definitely start Saquon those weeks. All right. So we got through the first headlining games, and now we're on the Sunday slate. Let me just double check, and we do have a Monday. Oh man, that's gonna be an exciting one. All right, so Sunday, let's fly through these. Pittsburgh, Atlanta. So we've got to do.
Arthur Smith
Yeah,
revenge game.
there we go. Hey, right off the bat, I like how the NFL script writers are going this year. So we've got 2 new quarterbacks in both situations, and on Player Profiler this morning, some of the folks were hedging that it's going to be Fields opening up the year. We'll see what happens, but right now Russell Wilson does have a bit of an injury, so that's playing into the calculus a little bit. And we've got Kirk Cousins recovered from an injury. I think the Falcons are good at the quarterback no matter what happens there. We just need those weapons to get utilized. That's a very consolidated tree as well with Drake London, Kyle Pitts. It's hard to really be all in on Mooney. So to me, it's just Bijan Robinson is going to be that. Those are the 3 that you're going to really care about for Atlanta and Pittsburgh. It's kind of only George Pickens. I'd like to start with the Pickens aspect. Are you in on Pickens? Because I don't see many other threats around him at all on his team for targets.
Pickens is fine at ADP. Like Pickens is in a spot where he's not going to hurt you. And I think that you would have expected maybe a little bit more steam when Deontay Johnson left. But he was alongside guys like Zay Flowers. Now there's a gap between the 2 of them. So for me, it's Pickens is fine at ADP. Do we think he has a wide receiver 1 outcome in an Arthur Smith-led offense? It could happen, but it's a difficult bet to make because Arthur Smith has never had a wide receiver get more than I believe it was 117 targets. And this is a guy who coached A.J. Brown at similar points in their careers that George Pickens is now. So Pickens last year leads the NFL in yards per reception. He's obviously an alpha. He's young. He's 23 years old. It's the kind of player that I like to have exposure to in my drafts. But for me, if he beats expectations a lot, then that's great. I don't think he'll hurt me at his current ADP, but I do feel like we'll have some frustrating usage per games with Arthur Smith. It's just been sort of par for the course. Justin Fields, I like more for a George Pickens breakout season than I do Russ a little bit, because I think we saw Justin Fields, how he was able to elevate his first read with DJ Moore and was very apt to continue going to his wide receiver 1. And the situations are not sort of dissimilar when you look at the target competition. Last year, Cole Kmet had success with Fields. Cole Kmet in this situation could be a Freiermuth. And the wide receiver 1, George Pickens, is the DJ Moore in this scenario. So with Russ, I feel like a veteran, been around the block a little bit more, obviously way more happy than Justin Fields. I feel like he would be more apt to kind of check down to guys like Jalen Warren, Najee at times, maybe take some shots downfield to different receivers. I'm hoping with Fields, it'll be running backs, Justin Fields, rush attempts, and consolidation with George Pickens and Muth. I think it would just be an easy way for us to play it as fantasy managers. Justin Fields, if you look at the splits with DJ Moore, I mean, it was awesome. They were awesome together. So I'm interested in it. But Pickens, I think it's just temper the expectations a little bit and just know that you're getting him at a point where he's not going to hurt you. You're paying like high-end wide receiver 3 prices in some formats, low-end wide receiver 2 prices. He'll hit that. But can he sort of overcome the Arthur Smith limitations that we saw hold back guys like Drake London?
Awesome. All right. That kind of flips my mindset on it a little bit, because I was thinking maybe Russ Wilson would be better for him just because of the connection I've seen with him and the Tyler Lockett in the past. But you're right. DJ Moore had one of
Courtland Sutton, like you could be right on this. Like I could be off on this. I just think it's Justin Fields opens things up for his primary read downfield because they're so scared of his rushing ability, puts a lot of pressure on defenses that way. but hey, there's a lot of smart people on the George Pickens is going to get those downfield throws from Russ, like we saw with Lockett. Sutton as well had a lot of success on those. So you could be correct on this one. And again, if Russ is the starting quarterback, I still think he's fine at his ADP, but I think his chances of having an even better season might be there with the rushing threat of Fields.
All right. Well, we can move on. I do definitely as far as Justin Fields, I want him to get another chance. So I'm excited to see because he's really dynamic, and I think it was just the low passing attempts in general is what kind of made me nervous. But it is consolidated. If it's just a Fryermuth and Pickens, I don't think that's going to hurt him either way. So, all right, looking forward to that. I think both teams are better than last year. So now we've got Buffalo and Arizona, where Arizona has a healthy Kyler Murray, added a Marvin Harrison Jr. We've got a Buffalo Bills that, on paper, is taking a step back with no Stephon Diggs, and I think Arizona's pretty clear cut. I do love both quarterbacks, so should be good for fantasy points wise. But um, how about this time? Pick a side that interests you the most. Who do you want to go with here?
I mean, this whole game is awesome.
Yeah.
It's just this is a great one. It's two quarterbacks who are going to be in our starting lineups. There's a lot of players on both sides of the field that are going to be in our starting lineups. It's Marvin Harrison Jr.'s first game as a pro, which is truly exciting on the road in Buffalo. It's Kyler Murray. There's a lot of hype and juice behind Kyler Murray right now. Guy's fully healthy. I think people are not really taking into account his rushing upside. There's a lot of reports that the quickness is completely back. We thought it looked perfectly back when he came back last year, but apparently he's taken it up a notch. And seeing Kyler on a team with wide receivers who can separate, like Marvin Harrison Jr., add in the Trey McBride, everything's sort of coming together for Arizona. I'll say this one: Arizona might win this in Buffalo. This is a dog who is barking on the road. Buffalo needs to win this game. I think it's the home opener. It's a bad taste in your mouth if you lose this. I think Arizona might be for real as a turnaround team this year. A lot of good vibes there in year two. They were very efficient running the ball. That should continue. Now they have pass catchers, and they have enough talent on that offense to really put pressure on opposing defenses. And then you have the threat of Kyler Murray, a player who, when the game's on the line, you want the ball in his hands. So last year we saw Buffalo in an opening game against the Jets. That was the Aaron Rodgers one. Now you've got the Kyler Murray one. So I'm very excited for this game.
Yeah, awesome, man. Yeah, that was a rough start. I don't know how they lost that game last year, so they're going to be looking for redemption. Let's move on to Tennessee, Chicago. So this is highly anticipated for another rookie, the number one overall pick, Caleb Williams, and I mean they had their game last night. He didn't play last night, so we'll wait to see his debut. So I mean, Will Levis too, though. It could be a potential high volume passing attack, but we did have the news last night. DeAndre Hopkins potentially out 4 to 6 weeks from yesterday's date, so maybe he misses a week or two in the regular season. But what are your thoughts on this game? And I think I'd rather spend the most time discussing the Chicago side.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, Caleb Williams. It's Caleb Williams is the story here. Caleb Williams is the hope for the franchise. I've said on several podcasts, I think he breaks the franchise record for passing yardage in year one. It's not a terribly high bar to cross. It's 4,000 passing yards, and he's got it. There was a number of quarterbacks who did that in the NFL last year. But I'm just very bullish on Caleb Williams, bullish on this Chicago passing game in general. And we'll see right out the gate. It's a fun matchup, but they are at home. You also get to see Brian Callahan's debut in Tennessee, sort of the philosophical change of what they've done, going from Derrick Henry to what should be a pass-happy team. So I think Chicago takes care of business at home. I think Caleb Williams wins his first start, and I think he looks good. I think he looks good throughout the season. I think Caleb Williams is going to finish as a QB1 this year, and he's got the weapons. Like I saw, you want to talk about a number of these Chicago pass catchers. It's a fun discussion. I mean, Rome
Yeah.
Odunze is my guy. I've talked about the value of drafting Rome Odunze in redraft this year based on where he's priced. He's already starting to flash at camp, but it's sort of in the NFL, life finds a way if you're an alpha, and guys can only stay boxed out for so long. A guy like Romadunze might not start the season just with a bunch of smash games, but I think that there's a chance that he's the most productive Chicago Bears wide receiver over the course of
Okay.
the second half of the year. It happens. CeeDee Lamb, it happened in Dallas. CeeDee Lamb comes into the league. He is attached to Amari Cooper, attached to Michael Gallup. People worried about his year one targets. And second half of the year, he leads them in everything. Last year, we didn't see it with JSN. And I think that's part of the reason that people are a little bit apprehensive of this situation. But you rarely get a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL draft with his sort of a profile in this cheap a range of ADP. So for me, I think Romadunze is super, super interesting. And I'll be interested to see how they utilize him early on in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as we like DJ Moore, no disrespect to him, we haven't seen a nuclear season from him. So there's absolutely room for Roma Dunze. Love that. Okay, so I think the only real question outside of that game or inside of that game is the Tajay Spears versus Tony Pollard, um, who's the running back to have. Are you? Let's just say it is a redraft. Are you taking both? I know some folks don't want to do a handcuff, but it's kind of a scenario where I see both getting playtime, like a Najee Harris, Jalen Warren situation. How do you feel about those two backs?
Only take both in a best ball format because
Okay.
this is the opportunity that there could be a true split. And in a redraft format, you're sort of hoping one gets hurt and you're having to use two mid-round picks on it.
Yeah.
Like I would rather take a shot on either than take both in a redraft. And I think there's an argument for both of them. Tajay Spears is the one that I've preferred because he's usually cheaper. And we saw him get 50 receptions plus last year as a rookie. He's explosive. Tony Pollard, I just feel like is a little bit more expensive. I can usually get Tajay Spears a full round later. But if you want to take Tony Pollard, I think it's fine as well. I think both of them are going to be utilized as pass catchers. That sort of elevates their fantasy floor. And I think the coaching staff really wants them both to be involved. They're very like for like. So you won't see them scheme differently when one's in the game and out of the game. That's sort of an exciting thing for Tennessee. And I think they both are safety blankets for Will Levis. And the DeAndre Hopkins injury, if this lingers to start out the year, you could see even more opportunities for these running backs as pass catchers. So both are fine, but don't draft both in redraft, only in best
Gotcha.
ball.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I like that interchangeability. Levis just doesn't even have to think; just go out there and play. And I think this next matchup, let's stay in that same mindset. Let's just start with the Bengals. This is Bengals versus New England. They're at Cincinnati, but with the running backs, Chase Brown, Zach Moss. Sounds like Brown. We already knew Brown was more explosive, but it seems like the tides are shifting towards him. But how do you feel about that situation? And then we can take it to the greater matchup.
Chase Brown for me, it's Chase Brown's the guy. Like
All right.
this is a Chase Brown. The drum beats are already there for him. I think Zach Moss is going to be utilized as a runner, but Chase Brown's going to get the valuable targets. We've seen Joe Burrow his last full season as a starter heavily target his running backs Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon that season. It's just sort of Joe Burrow's MO, what he's used to, and for me, Zach Moss, we've seen him. He's 26 years old. He's never had a season with a high number of catches. Last year was his high, and he didn't crack 40. So Chase Brown is a guy with 4.4 speed. He is exactly the kind of back that we want to target that can beat ADP. He's got multiple pathways to beat ADP, both as a receiver, on explosive plays, high value touches. Moss sort of needs to be a guy who's fed volume and scores touchdowns. So for me, it's I'll bet on Chase Brown. He's still cheaper in a lot of formats. I think that the ADPs flip by the time we get to the end of the month, though.
All right. That's what we need to know. I mean, because again, we can talk about the high level guys, but these are the kind of difference making in your matchup type of decisions you need to. Because people would still blindly take Zach Moss because they look at the stat score from 2023 and they see, oh, with the Colts he was going off. But yeah, I do think it's there for Brown to take. And with the rest of the matchup, even though I mentioned, we know the high level guys like a Chase Brown, Jamar Chase. I do think it still matters in your first round when you're deciding, and again, this is for a redraft perspective. When you're deciding between do I start or do I draft Chase or Amon-Ra or Justin Jefferson in that range, who do you feel the most comfortable with? And is this the Jamar Chase blow up season in his contract year?
I think you can make a case for a number of those wide receivers this year. Jamar Chase had 100 receptions last year, so that was like a big plateau for him to cross. And the target total for him when Joe Burrow was healthy would have been a lot higher than we saw with Chase at the end of the year. So, like, I'm not going to talk anybody out of drafting Jamar Chase. With Justin Jefferson, he's sort of a value though at this point because he's gotten pushed down because of the question marks with the
Yeah.
offense. But Justin Jefferson is an outstanding player, been one of the best fantasy wide receivers really we've ever seen. And Jefferson also sort of a one out for Jefferson is if we see a Jordan Addison suspension those
Mm,
first maybe 3 games of the year, and we already know we're going to miss TJ Hawkinson, you could
uh-huh.
see an absurd target share for Justin Jefferson, like absolutely absurd, like 35% target share for the first 3 games of the year. So I don't want to talk anybody out on any of those guys. I think they're in a
Yeah.
tier for a reason. If you want to go with like quality of offense, Amon-Ra St. Brown to me is in just the best offense of the three of them this year. So you might have get more exposure to like true blow up games, but the touch competition is obviously higher for Amon-Ra St. Brown as well.
All right. And you guys, there's just not too much to say about New England because it is a developing offense. I really I'm not telling anyone to start any of these guys, but Ramondre Stevenson did get that contract extension, so they have confidence in him. And I think that already has we've already seen the ADP rise just from that alone because people were a little bit worried. What was the situation? They bringing in Antonio Gibson, so the real problem is just what is the touchdown upside. But on the other side, Ezekiel Elliott led the team in receptions, so there is some pass catching upside for Ramondre as well. Um, and we can go on to the Houston versus Colts in division matchup. Two rookie quarterbacks last year. Now we got two sophomore quarterbacks this year. And CJ Stroud was in the Hall of Fame game last night. I was taking CJ Stroud ahead of Bryce Young in every draft last year, pretty much based on the Josh McCown interview, even though he was on the team that ended up drafting Bryce Young. I I just felt so confident in everything I was hearing about Stroud and excited that worked out. Now this guy is great, kind of raised the bar for rookies like a Caleb Williams coming into this season and say, hey, this is what we want for someone that is touted to be that next guy. So excited for this guy who's been the tide to raise all the ships for Houston. I think the big debate is Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell. Right now, I've got Nico Collins as the number one wide receiver. I'm taking Tank Dell just because we saw his points per game were really high, the highest of all of those guys and a lot of other players. So, he had a couple of injuries. That's the only thing to factor in, and they did bring in Diggs, but we saw, hey, Noah Brown, he could go off for more than just one game. So I think there's more room for other guys to eat. I love this team. I live in Texas. I'm not a Texans fan, but I'm all in on the Texans
They're
this year.
easy. They're easy to root for. They're like they're a likable team for sure. You found your. We were all over CJ Stroud over Bryce Young at Player Profiler. It was one where it was Anthony Richardson, then CJ Stroud, then Bryce Young for us, and it was a tier break where we were taking guys like Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of Bryce Young at Player Profiler. It just was for me. It's like Bryce Young was a smaller quarterback without rushing ability. Those guys are tough bets to make. CJ Stroud was a guy who has prototypical size. He's built like a Joe Burrow, like an Aaron Rodgers type, and he's just such a quick learner in the NFL. Played like a veteran, way beyond his years. Even when
Yeah,
they had offensive line issues, he didn't have those games where he'd get frazzled and throw picks. He was one of the most tight quarterbacks with the ball in his hands last year, and I think he takes a big step forward in year two. I think it's also a second year for Bobby Slowick, who I think is a really good offensive coordinator. So I think you'll see CJ Stroud take massive leaps forward in terms of passing touchdowns. So it's interesting. The wide receiver room is interesting. Early
Lay it
reports
on me.
say
Lay it on me.
so. I mean, for like Nico Collins, Tank Dell, they're both really good players. They proved it last year, and they proved that they can play alongside CJ Stroud and produce. Early reports are Stephon Diggs is leading them in targets at training
Okay.
camp. The one thing about a guy like Diggs with a young quarterback is there going to be a veteran's deference where a guy like CJ Stroud gets Diggs? He targeted Robert Woods a lot early last year before like the emergence of the younger wide receivers. I could see a scenario where Diggs gets off to a fast start, where Houston tries to develop Diggs and tries to really feature him. We know that Nico Collins and Tank Dell can still be successful. Based, the yards per route run for Nico Collins was exceptional. Trailed only Tyreek Hill last year. Tank Dell, obviously one of the biggest blow up week guys of any young player in the league last year. But I don't know. I feel like maybe I've been underrating Diggs based on some of the initial reports, because if Stephon Diggs gets 85% of his Buffalo 2022 usage, just 85%, then he's a real win at his current ADP value. There's an argument to take any of the three, because I do think this offense is going to score a lot of points, be very effective in the passing game. I think that it's kind of like we've seen a Cincinnati a few years back have all three receivers finish with 1,000 receiving yards. That's in the range of outcomes. That year it was Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, his rookie season. I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibilities with a quarterback like CJ Stroud.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really exciting. So hey, it's a week one show. That means start Diggs week one. If if you have a league where you've already got multiple Texans, I'm finding a way to get all of them in there. I just can't sit them week one. But we'll get an idea of how this offense and the pecking order goes as the weeks go on. So stay locked in with the Player Profiler crew, and they'll help you navigate those waters. But I'm hoping we can see one of those really epic seasons where he can support three guys. And we know that the running game should be good because Singletary was able to do it, so Mixon should be able to do it. But let's pivot to the Colts, and um, here's a scenario where we got. I think I haven't like just said it. I keep kind of dancing around him potentially being the quarterback one here, Anthony Richardson. I don't worry about the injuries, especially when it's not a lower body injury. So for them, the coach to just go out and say, "Hey, we're not changing his play style." That's all I really needed to hear to still feel confidence in Anthony Richardson. They didn't even have a Jonathan Taylor this past season for the most part to help him. For one, develop, but also just to help him in the backfield there. So I think this team is healthier and ready to roll. Yes, they add a really fast wide receiver who could potentially be wide receiver 2 or the wide receiver 3 in the Adonai Mitchell. But he and Alec Pierce have some speed, so they should be able to stretch defenses to some degree. And you got the Michael Pittman Jr. So I'm really in on both of these teams to have a good week one. We can keep moving, but I did, just because it is, exciting. AR, how are you feeling about the Colts side of this?
I'm very excited, as everybody should be, about Anthony Richardson. Last year, he had 2 top 5 quarterback performances his first 3 weeks on the job. And I think that he's going to be a better passer than some people realize. Shane Steichen has had a lot of success with young signal callers. We saw Justin Herbert take a huge step forward. We obviously saw Jalen Hurts take a big step forward. So I'm very bullish. And also, you talk about the wide receiver room in Indianapolis. All of these guys are high draft capital players, even down to Alec Pierce, their wide receiver 4, was a high draft pick. They have size, they have speed, and then they add Josh Downs, who had the record for the most receptions for an Indianapolis Colts rookie in history. So I'm bullish. I think this is exactly the kind of game that we want the season to start out with. Richardson, Stroud, we talked about Kyle. We give all these awesome quarterback matchups week 1, so this is
Yeah.
absolutely one of them. I saw your question on the
Yeah,
train. If
so
you
I
want to
was
jump to
thinking
it, sure.
we could skip the next game and then come back to it. We'll just jump into the Carolina Panthers because Kid
Sure.
Ridiculous asked, "Do you think Deontay Johnson? How do you think he'll do Week 1 with Bryce Young?" And I've been listening to the reports from the coaches, and they're saying Deontay Johnson is the guy that they love. Deontay Johnson, and somehow, some way, I've had at least 5 guests on the show, all from Carolina, and including the FF Dynasty, who you guys work with. And man, I'm kind of excited. It's hard when I'm doing dynasty rankings for where to put Bryce Young because it's all hinges on this season. But he has everything around him. You've got an Xavier Leggett, and this is still kind of focused on Deontay Johnson question, but Xavier Leggett will stretch the field. He's going to be a rookie, so they're not really going to be force feeding him too much, but he is fluid. I'm seeing this guy. He can move. So maybe they expand his role at some point. You still have Adam Thielen around there who at least is distracting the defense. And they do add Jonathan Brooks. They spent the most money in free agency on the offensive line. So they're focused on protecting and giving Bryce Young time. So I think that's Deontay Johnson, who happened to have one of the best uh, times to get open in the league this past season. That combination should have plenty of time for Bryce Young to just keep peppering Deontay with the ball, man. Deontay can get open at will. So I think Deontay is being paid to be the guy. They're talking like he's going to be the guy. I don't think the touchdown upside will be there, but if there's a big change, we've seen David Canales come in and really rejuvenate careers of quarterbacks, whether you want to give him all the credits of that or not. That's been the case. So I think it's going to be good. And especially with week 1, he asked, week 1, is Deontay Johnson going to be healthy week 1? So I think they're going to game plan to get him the ball week 1.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's and any like
And
Bryce
it's in
Young
the
could,
dome.
yeah, and Bryce Young could take a step forward this year. But even if he doesn't take a step forward, if we take like a negative perspective, we saw how effective Adam Thielen was to start last season as a primary receiver with Young. So, like, I think at this point in their careers, Deontay Johnson is way ahead of where Thielen was last year. Thielen was great to start last season, and I think we'll see a similar target share to Deontay. He's had multiple seasons in his career where he's commanded a lot of targets, and I think this will be one of them. Very good value at ADP right now.
All right. And then how are you feeling about the Saints side of this?
The Saints, it's we'll look and see how Chris Olave does this year. He's a guy that I'm remain optimistic about. I think Rashid Shaheed is interesting as sort of a sleeper because he's a guy who's going to have to step up. There's just a lack of intermediate pass catchers on this team besides Alvin Kamara. So I'm hopeful that Chris Olave gets more manufactured touches. If we can combine a very high target total for Olave with the air yards he gets downfield, he could be a guy who beats expectations. It's sort of been 2 years where we've been waiting for it with Olave. Year 3 could be a really fun one for him.
Yeah, excited to see him do a little bit more. I just feel like we're just not getting everything we can get out of him. He's definitely got talent. And we'll go back up to this Miami versus Jacksonville, the double Florida rivalry going on here. And Miami is very exciting. Tua got paid. I mean, at this point, we know these guys in Miami. Nothing really changed for this team. They did add another running back, but other than that, it's Odell Beckham and some other depth wide receivers. So I mean, it's just exciting to see those guys back on the field. I mean, wide receiver wise, Tyreek Hill may be one of the best all time when it's all said and done. I think he's a easy Hall of Famer. And I think most of the question marks are just with Jacksonville since it's still Christian Kirk and Trevor Lawrence, but they replace Ridley with Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis. Week 1 wise, I'm not too excited for those guys. I don't know when I can start Gabe Davis confidently, so I would not be telling anyone watching my channel to draft him. But Brian Thomas is more of a down this season. Second half of the year, or maybe sooner. Actually, how do you feel about the Brian Thomas situation?
Well, Brian Thomas Jr. is the interesting one for this game because we'll see how he's utilized. Is it going to be heavily utilized? Gabe Davis to me is the Zay Jones replacement. Bet like maybe a little bit more really about similar to the way they utilize Zay Jones, big play threat down the field. Uh, Brian Thomas Jr. could be a little bit more in the Ridley role than some people think. Kirk's always been a guy who's been a cap ceiling target guy. Evan Ingram gets as many targets as he can handle. But Brian Thomas Jr., I think week one, he could be a sleeper because he's a player who is very athletic. It's a guy who scored 17 touchdowns in the SEC last year. He's a little bit better with the ball in his hands than some people think. He's got yak ability. I'm bullish on Brian Thomas Jr. I've taken some shots on him, a lot of exposure in best ball, but I'm starting to mix in some redraft shares of him as well. I think that his role could be a little bit larger than some people think.
All right. Well, we're flying through. I think we can get through this in like 20 minutes. So, New York Giants, I almost started with them because of the Theo Johnson piece, but now let's focus to Malik Neighbors, my number one favorite player in the draft this past season, this year. I've been playing campus to Canton. I've had Neighbors on my teams well before he entered the league. I love this guy. Very excited that he's finally in the league. And I mean, between him and Marvin Harrison Jr., I have them both projected for a lot of targets and receptions. I think Neighbors, I have like 84, something like that. Neighbors, I have 81 receptions on 22 targets. So we'll see how that really shakes out. But uh, and actually, I'll go back because it's just so tough. We've seen this field stretcher in Slayton. We've seen slot Robinson for it just isn't enough. I just think it's going to be, let's see how many different ways we can get Malik Neighbors the ball and involved. Even the running game is taking a significant drop, even though I believe in Theo Johnson, or excuse me, Devin Singletary. But again, you lose Waller, who barely played last year. It's the Malik Neighbors show. If it's not, this team is done, and it might be done anyway. This still could be a rebuild year, but how are you feeling about I'd love to hear more about Malik Neighbors, to be honest. How do you feel about him and the matchup in general? Who we got another exciting rookie on the other side of the ball.
I mean, Malik Neighbors is awesome, and I think Malik Neighbors is going to finish as a wide receiver one in year one, as
Yeah,
will Marvin Harrison Jr. So Malik Neighbors actually think will get more targets than Harrison Jr. He's going to be the focal point of the Giants' offense. Extremely explosive. This is a guy who's going to catch a lot of passes. He's going to get a lot of receiving yards. The touchdown ceiling is sort of the difference between him and Harrison Jr. Can he produce the amount of touchdowns to sort of give you that
yeah.
Puka Nacua, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson type season? But I think him getting inside the top 12 scorers, he's too good. Malik Neighbors should be drafted about a round earlier than he is right now. So in wide receiver 20 on underdog, I think he's a little closer to like the wide receiver 13 range, right around there with like the Drake London, the Chris Olave types. I think that's where he should be considered. So he's fantastic. And then Minnesota, we already talked about it with Justin Jefferson. It's a great way to start it out. We got the two LSU wide receivers going head to head. Another little factor for this game, I'm interested to see Aaron Jones's involvement
Yeah.
week one, especially with, we talked about the available touches in that offense. I think they're going to work in some Ty Chandler, but Jones has always been a guy who's had a second back next to him and just been very efficient and explosive on his touches. So I'm interested in seeing Aaron Jones and Justin Jefferson, no matter who's behind center in Minnesota. It's not a great game, but it's a game where we have very fantasy relevant players on it.
Awesome. Yeah, excited for that one. Okay. And yeah, we'll see who's actually the starter week one for the Vikings. Looked like it could be Darnold, but yeah, still got some good first round talent at the receiver spot, so they should be good overall down the stretch. And okay, yeah, we'll go on to the Chargers and Vegas Raiders here. So we got Justin Herbert, who I would say folks are a little concerned with that injury, that this could be another Joe Burrow preseason injury. This is, I believe, more related to plantar fasciitis than other injuries, but I've seen that linger as well. You have to walk, and that's a tough injury to recover from, and you're planting all the time and having to maneuver in the pocket. So we can't just fully dismiss it. They say a 2 week injury, so we'll just. I'm not going to overreact today, but we will monitor that one and see if he's good to go, because it's a young receiving core and they're going to rely on this guy. I think when we're just talking about week one, who are you confident in for the Chargers to start Week 1? Is it the rookie Lad Palmer, Josh Palmer? How you feeling?
I don't know if I'm necessarily that excited about any of them week one. Lad McConkey's the one though. Josh Palmer's a very good value, but again, he's a guy that I would prefer in best ball than thinking he's going to have some incredible season in managed redraft leagues. McConkey is there's a lot of strong reports for him out of camp. He was a guy where maybe we thought they would have kept him predominantly in the slot. It sounds like they're moving him all around the offense. Uh, I think McConkey's a guy who's going to end up giving us high end wide receiver 3 numbers as a rookie. I think that's sort of his range of outcomes, similar to like a Christian Kirk in terms of a ceiling, where maybe 130 target guy, 125 target guy, and he's got some juice with the ball in his hands. Athletically, very similar to like a Garrett Wilson. I'm just not super excited about this game, especially with the Herbert news.
Yeah.
I got to see my guy Brock Bowers though. Brock Bowers is the one that gets me
Yeah.
most excited. Opening game for Brock Bowers. It's the chosen one at tight end, sort of like what we saw with Bijan Robinson at running back, Marvin Harrison Jr. at wide receiver, Malik Neighbors at wide receiver, and now we get Brock Bowers at tight end. It's just this guy who we've been waiting on for years, and I think he's the real deal, and I think he's going to get 100 targets this year, and I think it's difficult to hold a talent like Brock Bowers back, even though the quarterback play is not great, even though Devontae Adams is there as a target hog as long as he's in silver and black. But for me, it's Brock Bowers, Brock Bowers, Brock Bowers. This is what I want to see out of this game.
Awesome. And if you're a zero RB guy, my favorite guy is Amir White. So, I mean, that's a really good week 1 flex play. We want him to stay healthy. He gets a lot of carries. Every time he's played, he's gotten like 20 plus carries. So let's see how he can do. I'm curious to see what his actual pass catching upside is. But even though my initial gut wants to say, they're both teams want to run the ball, new coaching staff for the Chargers wants to run the ball. But is there any part of you that thinks there's a little bit of a revenge game element? Because I think the highest scoring game for the Raiders last year was versus the Chargers when they basically got the Chargers coach fired. I think it was like 63 points or something they put on him.
Antonio Pierce definitely put his foot on their throat. And that was sort of the game that, well, Antonio Pierce is our head coach kind of deal. That was like the most positivity we've seen out of the Raiders in quite some time. I don't know about that though. It's a new coaching staff.
Yeah.
I don't know if NFL players think like that. In division, I think they do, but I don't know if there's like the hatred and animosity that exists with like maybe college programs where guys really simmer all summer. These guys are pros; they're making a lot of money, and there's a lot of movement between teams. The new coaching staff in LA, I don't think that that's going to be like revenge. I do think Harbaugh is going to have them in a position at home to play solid defense. They're going to attempt to run the ball, like you said. But the Chargers might be in big trouble if Herbert is slow out the gate.
Yeah. And I wanted to get this question in really quick. So Dobbins or Edwards, full PPR. Reports are they want Edwards to be the guy. Edwards is currently banged up a little bit, so Dobbins is taking most of the reps, and they do seem to like Vidal a lot from a lot of different perspectives, including pass blocking, which matters a lot to them. But how do you feel about that backfield?
I think I'm probably on boring Gus Edwards. The guy was brought over. He's got familiarity with the coaching staff. Greg Roman's play. He's had multiple seasons where he's had decent amount of carries in a Greg Roman offense. I'm a little worried that this is going to be a split where you're
Yeah.
going to see all 3 guys utilized. Maybe Vidal's the one where over the second half of the year they see what's happening with him. But I think this could end up being a split. I think this is going to be a run. I think this could be a running back by committee, not necessarily because that's what they want to do, but because that's what they're going to be forced to do. Harbaugh wants to run the ball. Roman wants to run the ball. You've already got Justin Herbert banged up. So for me, it's not a backfield that I'm actively trying to draft a player from, but I would bet on Gus Edwards having the most fantasy points at the end of the year.
All right, and we we're trying to cook through here. We've got the Denver Broncos versus Seattle Seahawks. I was talking last night. It does feel like Seattle's a little bit slept on, just in general. there's plenty of weapons there. So I think they can, as long as Geno Smith is healthy. Currently, last time I looked, Geno Smith was undergoing some imaging for something, but they do have Sam Howell, who for a long period of time, was the NFL leader in passing yards. So it's not like they don't have a guy who can get these weapons the ball. So you're going to be starting Kenneth Walker and DK Metcalf, and I think the question is, does JSN have that breakout season? And then for Denver, it's a lot of questions. But I want to ask about Cortland Sutton and Troy Franklin. How do you feel about those two guys? And then maybe we can do the running game.
Cortland Sutton's one I'm interested in, just because I think he's at an affordable range, and with a lot of the question marks at wide receiver alongside him, and the potential for a Bo Nix starting this game, or a Stidham starting this game, where again it's like the veterans deference going to like the player that's been the most experienced and the guy who's had the most fantasy success. I'm not that excited about Troy Franklin. I'm a little worried that Troy Franklin is going to be behind Marvin Mims, behind Josh Reynolds, and then, of course, behind Cortland Sutton. I don't think Troy Franklin's a guy that breaks out early on in the season. Things change, offenses change, but I think Marvin Mims is the one that I would
Okay.
bet on besides Troy. Sounds like it's like Mims they're going to play. Troy Franklin was like a backup on the outside.
Okay.
And then running wise, I've been interested in Jaleel McLaughlin this offseason. I'm interested a little bit in Audric Estime. Javonte, if you want to take shots, he's super, super cheap now. But I just don't think that there's a whole lot of loyalty with Sean Payton regarding Javonte Williams right now.
Yeah. And, if it's Dynasty and you already have your rosters, sure, you can roll out Javonte week 1. But for redraft, guys, I still believe for redraft, draft guys on good teams, start there first, because of the touchdown upside, just in general with the offense and the more drives that you will have instead of the 3 and outs. It's a rookie quarterback. They're going to take their time with this situation. Week 1, I'm not starting Denver Broncos players. So this next matchup, we've got Dallas versus Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns had Defensive Player of the Year, and Cowboys had the runner-up MVP in Dak Prescott. I think with Cleveland, reports are Watson's healthy, and they added Jerry Jeudy, but Amari Cooper was really good. And what I'm hearing is Njoku is going to be the second option from a target perspective, and he was great. So I like what they can do. Nick Chubb, take your time, my friend. We'll see you when we see you, but Jerome Ford can handle it from there. And I think for a Dallas perspective, I mean, we're starting CeeDee Lamb. Obviously, he's being drafted, maybe behind CMC in redraft or maybe ahead. I don't know, but he's going up there as one of the top players. So you don't have to worry too much about that. I don't see a number 2 wide receiver for Dallas, but I do think Jake Ferguson might be that number 2 option. But running game's rough for that team. But how do you feel about this matchup? They're going to be in Cleveland. Right now Cleveland's projected to win 1.5, but just from a fantasy perspective, how you feel about this one?
I agree with you that David Njoku is a fine value. You're getting him right at the end of tight end 1 land. He was great at the end of last season, and the whole argument that he did it with Joe Flacco, so therefore he's going to regress back. They're a smart coaching staff, and I think they're going to utilize the weapons they have. You bring up the fact that Chubb is not out there. I think they're forced to use Njoku no matter what this year. And I agree with you that he should be a top 2 target on that team. CeeDee Lamb, for me, it's continue to have more of the same, but can he threaten Marvin Harrison Sr. target record in the NFL?
Ooh.
Like, that's the question mark, because CeeDee Lamb is completely in his prime. This is Dak Prescott has a fantastic connection with him. We've seen CeeDee Lamb last year cross the 180 target plateau. And can he get 200 this year? It's not out of the realm of possibilities, especially considering there's no Tony Pollard, there's no Zeke Elliott. Well, there's no old school Zeke Elliott
Yeah.
on this team, like Zeke Elliott in like the royal sense, where you've got a true running back 1. They've really gotten away from that. It's going to be Rico Dowdle. And Rico Dowdle, hey, if you have him in Dynasty, you're going to get usable weeks this year. But he's not a guy that's like, if anything, he's a kind of a journeyman who's been waiting his turn. Those guys usually are not guys where they're going to say, our game plan is Rico Dowdle this week.
Yeah.
So CeeDee Lamb, has minimal target competition at the wide receiver spot. He's an exceptional talent. He was wide receiver 1 last year. Cooper Kupp looked like he was going to repeat as wide receiver 1 a few years back when Jefferson got it. He got hurt. CeeDee Lamb, I think, could be the first wide receiver 1 repeat finisher in quite some time. So CeeDee Lamb for me, and I agree. Cleveland's interesting. Like, I like your Ford call out. I think he's a fun player for the beginning of the season, especially with Foreman getting hurt. Ford's a guy who can catch the ball. And Nick Chubb, I'm not too optimistic about on. That was a horrible injury. He's 29 years old. The guy's an athletic beast. I mean, obviously, we love seeing do we really love seeing 540-pound squats, though, when you're trying to recover from an injury? It's like, chill out a little bit, Nick Chubb.
Yeah, he's a monster, man.
Yeah.
Well, you nailed that section. So, all right, we're in the home stretch. Washington Commanders versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We've got some great weapons for the Bucks, and Washington, they add an exciting rookie with the number 2 overall pick in Jaden Daniels. So for me, it's the Jaden Daniels show there. We've never gotten that amazing season out of Terry McLaurin. Jaden Daniels supported an amazing Malik Neighbors season along with Brian Thomas Jr. How do you feel about Terry McLaurin and this matchup in general? And I should say how you feel about Jaden Daniels, obviously. But
super bullish, super bullish about Jaden Daniels. The rushing upsides there. I like the fit with Cliff Kingsbury. We've already seen Cliff Kingsbury have success with a mobile quarterback, and nobody's going to say Cliff is like it's not like Cliff is Mike McDaniel or Ben Johnson, but he certainly didn't hold Kyler Murray back from fantasy success.
Yeah, rookie of the year.
Exactly. And then took that massive leap in year 2. So Kyler Murray, that should make us feel a little bit reassured that he knows what he's doing. Jaden Daniels, I think, is going to rush for 800 yards this year, which puts him right in the wheelhouse of leading all quarterbacks in rushing yardage. There's nothing but positive vibes with the beat reporters in Washington, with the players in Washington. Jaden Daniels has leadership skills. He's a guy that people seem to gravitate to. There's literally nothing not to like with Jaden Daniels. The supporting cast is interesting. I think like McLaurin is set to have a strong start to the year. I think that there's an outside chance this could be a career year for Terry McLaurin.
Right.
But for me, it's you don't necessarily have to draft the correlation. You don't have to draft the stack. Just draft some Jaden Daniels. He's just a great value. As much enthusiasm as we have with some of the other signal callers we talked about, you're able to get Jaden Daniels significantly cheaper in drafts. So like Anthony Richardson might cost you a quarterback 6 price. Jaden Daniels in some home leagues might cost you like quarterback 13. And do I think Anthony Richardson will have more rushing touchdowns and more fantasy points? Yes. But it's not completely out of the realm of possibilities that Daniels could outscore him this year.
I like it. And yeah, we've seen historically the rookie quarterbacks for redraft, they'll go in like round in one QB league, they'll go in like around 9. So that's where Lamar went his rookie season, and AR, a lot of these guys have gone in that range. So you can get them at a decent price. Before we move on, Brian, we got another question. Brian Robinson, is he a sneaky RB1 dark horse candidate this year? Feels undervalued now because of the Eckler addition. And I've got Eckler getting a lot of PPR points, but he might not even be the same. But how do you feel about Brian Robinson Jr.?
I think Brian Robinson Jr. is the one where I would prefer having him to Eckler. Robinson's just younger. Robinson took a step forward last year as a receiver. Eric Bieniemy's gone, but Eric Bieniemy seemed to like using Robinson on like screenplays, which is something we didn't really anticipate last offseason. It comes down to the rushing touchdowns. If Brian Robinson is going to take a step forward and challenge for RB1 numbers, low end RB2 last year, but if he's really going to get in there, then it's sort of the Mark Ingram corollary when you're playing alongside a rushing threat and you get a bunch of rushing touchdowns, like we saw with Ingram with Lamar Jackson. Sort of I guess that would be the Alfred Morris corollary if we want to go with the Commanders / Redskins at the time, where RG3 was playing alongside another rookie running back in Alfred Morris, and Morris beat expectations. I think it's Austin Eckler's presence is annoying for Brian Robinson, to say the least, though, in terms of his receiving ceiling. But Robinson also sort of caps Eckler there as well. I'm on Robinson over Eckler. I think Robinson is like a kind of guy where he's fine at ADP. I think you can get by with him as an RB2 early in the year if you're in like a hero RB build or just a light on running backs build. But if he's going to take that step and get forward, it's got to come with rushing touchdowns. That's not something that he's done in his first 2 years in the league, but it doesn't mean it can't happen this year. And I will say it's interesting because Dan Quinn has talked to the media about how Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler are good at catching the football. So it's not like they're looking
Okay.
at Eckler as some specialist and Robinson is some like ground and pound guy. Like they view Robinson as a multifaceted running back.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for clearing that up because historically we've seen Commanders consistently do this. They've always had this dedicated RB2 who's a pass catching back. And I've been trying to remember the names, but they had a guy who was number 2 in the league in pass catching as
Chris
the RB.
Thompson. Chris
Yeah.
Thompson. Yeah.
So
He
it's
was like
like,
the zero RB hero that year.
yeah.
Chris
So it's
Thompson,
like,
you got in like round 12.
yeah, so we've seen it happen. Maybe there's a little bit of relevance there, but Jay Daniels will open up the run lanes for the running back there. So we're down to 2 more great matchups to close it out. We've got the Rams versus at Detroit. So 2 very exciting offenses. We saw the rookie of the Puka Nacua breakout season, Pro Bowler. I don't know what else to say. The guy was amazing. And I'll just let you open with us. How do you feel about this matchup, the primetime Sunday night game?
This is similar to what we saw with like the Green Bay matchup and with Philly. Like this is going to be a top-notch NFL football game. We saw them last year play that really, really good opening round wild card game in the NFL playoffs, where LA really took them down to the wire. And Matt Stafford played very, very well in the Matt Stafford revenge game / Jared Goff
Yeah.
revenge game. So you got both
Again,
teams who
yeah,
used to be
nice.
double revenge game. 2 teams that I think are playoff teams, 2 teams that view themselves as contender. A lot of pressure on Detroit. Detroit people are looking at as like a Super Bowl contender this year. They're at home, but the Rams are a plucky underdog. They've got healthy Kyron Williams. They've got healthy Cooper Kupp alongside Puka Nacua. Matt Stafford's healthy. And they last year seemed like kind of a transition year for them. This year seems like, hey, we're back. We view ourselves as a contender in the NFC West. So all sorts of players for fantasy. I mean, we don't even need to go through them. There's Nacua, Kupp, Laporta, Kyron Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery is going to be in a lot of lineups. Certainly the Sun God's going to be in every single lineup. Goff is sneaky this year. Goff, to me, this is Ben Johnson year 3. Goff like is the kind of guy where if you want to wait and take the last quarterback in your league or take 2 quarterbacks and rotate them, you can get Jaden Daniels and then take Jared Goff. If you're worried at all about Jaden Daniels sort of having early season growing pains, Goff is also going to be a guy that could really beat his ADP, and it doesn't cost you anything.
That's exactly how I like to play it. Like the Lamar rookie season, I went Dak in round 8, Lamar round 9. Like doing stuff like that. That's perfect. Okay, we got our final matchup here, the Monday Night Football, and we're hoping much better things for the New York Jets this time around. So we've got a healthy Aaron Rodgers, where they've added Mike Williams to the Garrett Wilson-led wide receiver core. We got Brees Hall, who's a beast. He came in the season recovering from an injury himself and looked great. So just continue doing that for us. And but from the 49ers position, on that receiver show, you got Debo and George Kittle. How are you feeling about this team in general? And again, this is I meant to say this with the Dallas piece, but that's a team where a lot of guys are in a contract year. You've got Brandon Ayuk in a contract year. Potentially, this is a contract year for Brock Purdy. How do you feel about these squads here in this matchup?
Oh, I mean, I think you have to be optimistic if you're a Jets fan. They've got a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, and now they've got actual quarterback play with Aaron Rodgers. I'm very interested in seeing Garrett Wilson. He's caught passes from 6 quarterbacks in his career. This is a guy that we really want to see take the next step forward and give us that wide receiver 1 season. Very, very talented player from down in your neck of the woods, if I'm not mistaken, a Texas guy who went to Ohio State. But for me, it's Garrett Wilson. We know Brees Hall is going to be heavily utilized, but Garrett Wilson, we've just been waiting on it. I think it would have happened last year if Aaron Rodgers didn't get hurt, just based on his utilization and his talent profile. And then on the other side of the ball, San Francisco, they're the favorites right now to win the Super Bowl. Do they make a statement at home, or can the Jets challenge them and actually beat them on their home field, which has been a really difficult thing to do over the last few years in like the sort of Christian McCaffrey run in San Francisco to win a home game in San Fran.
Awesome, man. I love this matchup. This week one is going to be incredible, guys. And thanks everybody for watching. Theo, can you tell everybody where they can find you and what's going on for this season? And then after that, I'll have one hot take question for you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can find all my work at Player Profiler and all my written work on playerprofiler.com, Player Profiler YouTube, all my shows, podcasts anywhere you get them. I record First Class Fantasy, Dynasty Life, press coverage, Sonic Truth. We're kind of everywhere this time of year over at Player Profiler. So, yeah, check us out. And if you want the all-in package, use the code Theo and you'll get $20 off.
Awesome, man. So you don't really need to give any explanation. Just give me your hot take and I'll hit the outro.
Ooh, a hot take. I love this one. Well, I gave you CeeDee Lamb sets the all-time record for targets. Okay, I'll give you a hot take. Dynasty-wise, your top 3 scorers at the running back position this year are the year 2 running backs: Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane. All 3 of them are in the top 3 in scoring.